Hello, my name's Greg Kingsley. I'm the Product Manager here at Ness Corporation, and during this instructional video we'll be going through the introduction of the Hikvision Access Control, getting the system online to our software, and going through the basic operation of setting it up so when we present a card it will be unlocking a door. The first thing we need to do, if we haven't used our IVMS 4200 for access control before, is we need to go up to Control Panel and enable the access control modules. To do this, up on the top left of the screen we click on Control Panel and then we select Module Customization. In the Module Customization we select the commonly used modules that will be displayed in IVMS 4200. When we click on it, we open up and we can see the various modules we can select. For our access control we will select the access control module and also the status monitor module. We then click on OK to save this, and then these modules will now be available to use in the software. In the operation and control part of the screen, as we click through the various options we can see all the ones that have been enabled, and as you can see we've now got access control option available as well as the status monitor. What we'll do now is we'll click on the access control to bring that to the main screen. And we can now see the Access Control tab is available for us. If this is the first time you've used the Access Control module, you'll be presented with an option of setting the scene. The difference between the two options is non-residential, you'll get time and attendance options, and if you select residential, then you won't get the time and attendance options. As this can't be changed in IVMS 4200 in the future, unless you're really going to use residential, then I would always recommend to use non-residential in case the customer decides to use time and attendance in the future. We can now add our access controllers into the software. For those who are familiar with IVMS 4200, you'll know that when we click on device management we get all our devices listed at the bottom of the screen. The system will scan our network and will show all the devices that it finds. This includes IP cameras, intercoms, and obviously the access controllers. So rather than going through all the devices looking just for our access control which we wish to add, we can click on the Access tab and then we can just filter and just see the access controllers. To do this, from the top of the screen we can click on our Access Control tab, and then on the left hand side where we've got all our options, the bottom option here is Device Manager. When we click on this, we'll filter out and only see our access controllers online, and we won't see all the other cameras and everything associated. On my system here that we've got two 4-door controllers. One of them has been activated and the other one is still at default, and we'll show you how to activate it, which is defaulted at IP address 192.0.0.64. Before we can use any control, what we need to do is activate it, so we select it, activate, which therefore also assigns a password to the controller. You can now assign your own password to the controller, but make sure you remember what this password is because this is used whenever we need to communicate to the controller. Once we enter that valid password and click OK, we'll see that the security access has gone from inactive to active. We can now change the default IP address, which is 192.0.0.64, to an IP that will fit on the customer's network. With the controller highlighted, we click on Modify Net Info, which opens up the network parameters. We can then put in the IP address of what we want on the customer's subnet and give it the right IP address in here. Give it a gateway address. In this example we'll just use 192.168.0.1, and then we enter the password for the controller that we used when we activated it. Then click OK. We can now see that the IP address of the controller is updated to the new settings. So on my demo system here we've now got two controllers, one of them with IP address 192.168.0.201 and the other with address 215, which we just added. So once they're both activated, got the right IP address, we can then add them to IVMS 4200. Once we click the controller and click Add to Client, it opens up an add window where we can now add some parameters for that controller. Example, we give it a nickname. In this example, we're going to call it Access Controller on the ground floor, so it's a good way of identifying where the controller is in the future. We give it a username and password, which is admin, and then the password is what we use to activate the controller. We can click the synchronize time device, and what that does is once it's added, it will pick up the PC time and automatically download it into the controller so it's got the right time and date. Once the controller is added, it then is visible up the top part of the screen. The device serial number will be visible also when it has been identified as the right username and password. If you've got any additional controllers you need to add, like we will on our system, go back to the bottom, select the controller, add to client, and we open the window. We can now add the new controller. In this case I'm going to call the second controller just Demo Access Controller. Put in the username and password. We want to synchronize the time to our server. Click add, and again we'll see it add to the top, and once it comes online the device serial number will become visible. We now know it's online. If there was an issue adding the controller, like the username and password may have been wrong, down the bottom right hand corner it will give you advice of what the issue was. Within the Access Control tab, down the left hand side, there's various programming functions that we'll cover in additional videos. For now we're going to run a wizard to get the system up and going in a basic format. From the Help tab we open the Access Control and Intercom wizard. We then click on the Enter Wizard button to open the wizard screens. Within the wizard it's a 5-step process to get the system up and running. We've already done step 1, which was adding the controllers to the 4200 software. Step 2 is adding persons or adding card holders to the system. To do that we click on Add Person. Before we can add users, what we need to do is add groups or organisation of what those users are going to be in. For example, what company, what department, etc. Organisations or departments are shown on the left hand side of the screen. To add an organisation we use the left add button as shown here, and we type in the organisation. On this example we're going to call the organisation Ness. Once added it becomes visible in the window on the left hand side. Once we've added an organisation, we can now add users, which use the right hand side of the screen as shown here. To add a new card holder, we click on the Add New Card Holder button, which opens up a new window where we can put some information for that card holder. First thing we'll do is add a name for this card holder. The rest of the information on this screen is not required, it's just there if you wish to use it for any of your requirements. To assign a card to this person, we click on the credential button. There's different type of credentials you can assign to a user. They may be a card for card access control. If you're using face recognition, it can be a face template that you can register, or if you're using fingerprint readers, you can register a fingerprint. In our example, we're going to add some cards. With the card tab selected, we click the Add button, which opens up an Add Card window, which we can add some details for this card we're about to assign to the user. From the card drop-down box, we can see various types of cards that we can add, from a normal card to a super card, visitor card, etc. But in our example, we're just going to select as being a normal card. You can add a comment under the card type, perhaps why you assigned that type of card to the user for future reference. The password field is if you're using a card reader that has a keypad on it, this is the password that's also assigned with that card. This password will only work for card and code operation, not code only. Under this card and code password is an effective date. You can set a time and date from when the card is active from and active to. To add a card into the system, you can do that in 3 different ways. First way is you could select any of the card readers on that controller, and when you present the card to that card reader it can enroll it. Or you may use a USB enrollment reader that plugs into the server, and then you can badge a card to that enrollment reader, or you can manually enter the card number in via the 4200 software. To select a card reader on one of our controllers that we're going to use to enroll a reader, from the drop down box we can see that we've got both controllers there, and when we expand those controllers we can see all the readers for those controllers. I'm going to select reader 1 on our controller. We then hit read, which puts that reader into read mode, While that reader is in enrolment mode, if I badge my card to that reader, we can see down the bottom the card then is automatically populated. We'll get the card number from the right format for that reader, and once we finish enrolling all the cards we wish for this person, we can then hit on stop reading, which takes that reader out of enrolment mode. Once we've finished adding all the credentials we wish for that particular person, we then click on OK to save that card. And then if there's no more editing required for that user, we can then click on OK again to close the editing window for that person. As we add more and more users, we'll start to see them populating in this part of the screen. We can bulk add users from a CSV file, and this is shown in further videos in this series. Before this card will work, we need to then give it permissions. At the moment we've added it, but we haven't selected what doors and at what times they're allowed to gain access to. To do this, we go to stage 3 of the process, which is adding permissions. Permissions are what we also know as access levels of what doors people can gain access to. Once we've clicked on Add Permissions, we then click on the Add button to add new permissions. This will open an Add dialog box where we can put in the parameters for the new permissions we wish to add. Within each new Add Permissions window, we first of all can give the permissions a name. We've also got templates of times, and there's 2 there as default. The whole week template is defaulted at 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The blank template is set for no days and no hours, and we can add more as required. So as an example, we may want to put office hours, and we'll have a look at adding new templates in a moment. In the next section of the Add Permissions window, we've got persons or card holders. We've first of all got the organisation that we added before, which was Ness, and if we expand that, we'll see all the users. Obviously we've only got the one user that we've added so far. The next part of the screen shows all our access control devices, or our doors. We can see here the 2 controllers that we've added. If we expand on each controller, we'll be able to see the 4 doors associated for each controller. We close that one and we can open the other one, we'll see the 4 doors for those as well. To program a new permissions or access level, first of all we give it a name. So in this example I'm going to call it full access, 24 hours 7 days a week. I'm going to leave it onto whole week template, which is again 24 hours 7 days a week as default. Then I'm going to select what user is going to be allowed to have full access 24 hours 7 days a week. Now when you're adding permissions, you have to assign at least one user to that permission. It's this reason why we added a card holder first before we added the permissions. For users to be assigned to this new permissions, we need to move them into the selected permissions window. To do this, we then use the right hand arrow to move them across, or if we want to take them out, we can move the left hand arrow to take them back out again. Once we've added the users who are going to be in this permission, we can now add what doors they're allowed to go through. To do this, we need to have some selected doors across into the selected door like we did with users. From the drop down box, we select what doors the people will be allowed through. In this case, I'm going to select every door. And like we did with the users, we use the right hand arrow to move all the doors across, left hand arrow to move them back again if we want to delete them. So I'm now going to use the right arrow, and we've now added them all in. We can see in the selected door window we've now got all the doors selected. So in this example we've given it a name so we can use later, called Full Access 24/7. We've selected the template whole week, which is a default one, which is 24 hours a day 7 days a week. We've selected what users are going to be assigned to this permissions, and we've selected what doors are going to be in this permission groups as well. Once we have all this configured, we can then click on the OK button to save this, and because we're communicating with the controllers, it will prompt us and ask us, do we want to download this new data, which will be the permissions and the card holder to this permission to the controllers. I then click on Apply Now, which will start the downloading to the controllers, and as it's downloaded we can also see the progress as it goes into each controller. Once downloading is complete to all controllers, we can then close this status window. When this is done, we can now see all the permissions that's been added, which is obviously the one. We can see the name, we can see the times, the persons assigned to it, and what doors they're allowed through. So this is a good summary that we can see. If we want details of what we were in the previous screen, we can click the details screen to open that box again. Once we've set permissions, when we add additional card holders, we don't have to go back into the permissions window to add permissions to that user. What we can do is when we add the user, we can add the permissions directly from the card holder screen. So let's just hit the previous button, we'll go back a step and we'll just add one more as an example. So going back one step, we can go back to adding more cards. We can see the one that we've already got in there. We'll click the add field and let's add one more. I'll give this user a name, in this case we'll call it Ben Sampson. We'll go down to credential. We'll add a card, click add. I'll manually add a card this time, so we get the card number and we type the card number in. Okay, then we hit the enter, we add that down there, hit OK. Now from there I can go straight to Permissions tab. When I click on the Permissions tab, we then open up, we can then see all the access levels or permissions that we've entered. We've only entered the one, of course. I can select that, put it across to the added selected permissions, and now we can hit the OK button. Now we can see the new user has just been added and the permissions are added to that user. We can then hit the next button again, which moves us forward in the wizard, and we go back to add permissions. We can now see that we've got both card holders assigned to that permissions level. As we add more, of course, you'll get more and more added. Once we've finished adding permissions in the wizard, we can then hit the next button, which moves us on to the next step, which is auto backup. In the auto backup options, it allows us to automatically back up at certain times the IVMS 4200 database. For this to occur, we make sure the auto backup tick is enabled. We can then select what days you want the backup to occur, just by toggling them on or off. We can then set what time we want the backup to occur. In this example, we'll put in there 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. And we then have a path of where we want the backup to go to. As default, it will put it into the IVMS 4200 file. It might be a good idea to change that to either a USB drive or an external drive from your main hard drive, even up to a Google Drive or a cloud drive. So if your hard drive fails, you're not going to lose that backup as well. Once the backup is being enabled and set up or disabled, we can hit the next button, which then completes the wizard, and all the cards we've added should now be working. From here we can click on a link which takes us directly to the door status monitor. From this window we can manually lock and unlock a door, as well as we can see events as they occur of people badging a card, etc. Once we click on to go to door state monitoring, we then can see in the status monitoring on the left hand side, we can see our 2 controllers, and when we click on those we can see the 4 doors for each controller. When we click on the individual door, we can manually unlock that door by clicking on the open button. The door will unlock, and we can click on the close and that will close it. Alternatively, we can also select all doors at once by clicking the shift button and enter, which selects them all, and then we hit open, it unlocks all doors together and they'll automatically relock after the unlock time. If we then click on the card swiping record tab, that'll open up a window where we can see any card events as they occur in the system. If we now present the 2 cards that we've got in the system, as they occur, we can see the events coming up with the card number, the name, organisation, etc., time and date, and we'll badge the second one and we can see the second one coming up as well. From there we can obviously see the event time they occurred, what door it was used on, and the event, whether it be passed or failed, etc. If we then click on one of those events, down the bottom of the screen we can then see more details related to that person if there was more details entered in the card database. This now concludes the quick setup instructional video, which I hope you found informative. Please watch other videos within the series that go into more depth into the system.